Games Workshop often does no model, no rules, but for this one let's talk about a whole bunch of miniatures that they do sell, but don't have mainline 40k rule support when maybe they could. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought I'd just round up a few units that I feel like could be really good candidates for adding into their faction's mainline rules, and perhaps be a few examples of where Games Workshop could expand some army rosters, as opposed to a fair bit of 10th edition that they seem to have been shrinking them. First up, and perhaps one of the units that most inspired me to make this one, were the Genestealer Cult Brood Brothers, who just seem to be a bit of an odd case of a unit that's fallen through the gaps. Games Workshop making a kill team upgrade sprue that can work with the Cadians, but if you assemble a bunch of models with their various bits of war gear, there's no great way to represent them. And even if you do just go with them being conversion bits for, say, Brood Brothers for Genestealer Cults, that's an army that's just incredibly limited right now. For the kill team kits that Games Workshop have come out with in 40k, in general, what they've tended to do is to give them data sheets if they don't map on perfectly to a unit that's already in the army. For example, they didn't change around the Pathfinders, the Infiltrators, or the Drukhari Hand of the Archon, basically just treating them as the same as the core unit in 40k. Maybe a few things got a bit of war gear like the Votan Hearthkin Warriors or the Pathfinders. For the Genestealer Cult though, the Brood Brothers one maybe doesn't really work quite so well for that, given that they've got really quite a lot of fun bits, as you can see here. Parts to represent a creepy medic, multiple different power weapons, icon bearers and shotguns and things, plus a demo charge in the unit as well, and none of these really map on perfectly with any one guard squad out there. Perhaps the icon bearer and the demo charge in particular. I suppose maybe you could use bits to represent command squads and some to represent infantry squads and other specialists, but that's very different to other options out there when you can basically just get the one kit and then field it as a unit. That really does seem to be the way that Games Workshop's been trying to make unit releases work in 10th. On top of that though, the Brood Brother Allied Guard units, they used to be available to all Genestealer Cult armies, and then the codex they got limited to just the one detachment, which looking in at the casual play kind of numbers, it looks like people play Brood Brothers as an army around about 1 in 20 of games, if not less. So basically if you did get this for your Genestealer Cult army, there's a good chance that they wouldn't be hitting the table in the vast majority of games, unless they're perhaps being subbed in as maybe not perfect proxies for neophytes or something. Between all that, I feel like they're a kit that's worthy of a datasheet in their own right. It would be quite nice to have the option to either just use the bits to represent guard units, or have them available as a specific Brood Brother unit anyway, and then they could just be an extra support unit for more mainline Genestealer Cults, just at max having a few infantry squads worth of Brood Brothers and nothing else, and then you'd still have the Brood Brother Auxiliary detachment where you could take the majority of the guard allied stuff. In general, they seem to have been making more effort to give kill team units 40k rules. The Nemesis Claw for the Night Lords got their own datasheet despite being an upgrade sprue, and the Tyranid Raveners even got 2 different datasheets to represent the kill team upgrades and without. Between all that, a basic datasheet for these guys just seems like it could be an easy win. Maybe it wouldn't add crazy amounts of new things to the faction, but I think it would be quite nice to allow Genestealer Cult players to field every unit in their army without jumping through too many hoops. Next up, Custodians and Sisters of Silence haven't really been returned to the forefront of Warhammer 40k for all that long at this point. They got their first mainstream 40k codex in 8th edition, I believe. Forge World released a whole bunch of Custodians units that had come out slightly prior to that, and those were given rules for Warhammer 40k via the Imperial Armour indexes. Along with the Knights, they're now some of the only units that have more mainstream Forge World unit support in 40k. It wasn't just the Custodians themselves that got model releases though, and the Sisters of Silence got their plastic kits. They have a layer to lead them as well in Warhammer 40k. But for whatever reason, the Sisters of Silence vehicle from the Horus Heresy didn't make the jump into the 41st millennium. They've got this rather sinister looking vehicle called the Kharon Acuisitor, and this came out alongside the rest of the Custodians Forge World range at a similar sort of time to the Burning of Prospero box set. The Custodians themselves have their Caladius tanks and transports, and this one's supposed to be a transport tank for the Sisters of Silence, if a rather disturbing hovering grav one, basically cloaked with stealth technology that masks its presence against Psykers, allowing them to get close, delivering elite squads of infantry into battle, and then supporting them with some heavy firepower to take down an entire cult's worth of Psykers. It just seemed a little bit odd to me that this one was treated differently, given they do have squads of infantry for the Sisters of Silence in 40k. I'm just not too sure why they decided to translate all the Imperial Armour Forge World Custodians toys over to 40k, but not the equivalent transport for the Sisters of Silence. I guess they're maybe supposed to have less of a presence in the 41st millennium compared with back when they were strong, but doesn't really seem to be a major problem that isn't just a hand wave away. I feel like actually having some sort of mainline threat would help out a fair bit if they do want armies of Sisters of Silence to be somewhat playable. I guess it could be potentially interesting coming up as well, given that there's a good chance it might be re-released in plastic at some stage. They're redoing the Custodians Forge World range to make that in plastic, and this might get the same treatment. I'd be kind of surprised if they ever did release rules for it in 40k, but just doesn't really seem any reason why they couldn't. One possibility that Games Workshop could go down if they wanted would be giving rules for the Slaughterbrute. This one's a currently already on sale plastic kit, and it's basically the dual build option for the Mutalith Vortex beast, which is the great lumbering Tzeentchian monstrosity with the warp vortex on its back that made the jump to the Thousand Suns codex when it was ported over from Age of Sigmar. It felt like with the Zangors and the Enlightened, they made the decision to bulk out the Thousand Suns roster and give them a few more options with some themed Tzeentchian cultists. Even if to me the Mutalith always felt a bit Tzeentchian but not necessarily Thousand Suns, at the time the World Eaters didn't have any sort of range or an army of their own. It'd be another, I think, 7 years until that happened, so there probably wasn't exactly much focus to give it rules at the time. It does mean that with lots of Mutalith Vortex beasts still being sold to Thousand Suns players, there's probably quite a lot of Slaughterbrute parts going unused. They could be handy enough for some conversions, I'm sure. Again, I'd be kind of surprised if Games Workshop came out with any rules for it. If there was any distant chance of them adding the model to the 40k range, it probably would have happened when the World Eaters Codex came out, and they chose not to then. The decision to use a bunch of Sigmar-style kits for 40k for the Thousand Suns was kind of out of character for them. And certainly in more recent times, the trend has been to try and lock miniatures and armies just to one game system and not to have them available for multiple, far more so than the other way round. Given the small amount of World Eaters units though, I'm sure at least some people will be interested enough in having a big cornate monster bound to the will of a champion throwing itself into the heart of the enemy. Though on the other hand, I feel like it would displease as many people as it did please if they added it in. I'm sure you get comments about being left with leftovers as opposed to releasing more Space Marine units if they chose to. Styling wise, I still feel like you definitely want the focus of the World Eaters to be on the Space Marines as opposed to the demons and allies and cultists. But I feel like at least in the current World Eaters Codex it seems like it has quite a good home. You could just give it rules and make it available for the Khorne Demonkin one. That would seem like a pretty appropriate place for it alongside the other Khornate units if you wanted to. I feel like it'd be more interesting to have a home there than have no 40k rules at all perhaps. Next up, one of the units that feels like it's fairly obviously missing from the Deathwatch Index is Kill Team Cassius. It seems that they were basically a casualty of when Games Workshop took the original Deathwatch Index away, tried to roll them into the Imperial Agents for a bit, and then walked it back with a digital index update. The interesting mixed kill teams they had came back, as did their Terminator squad, but the biggest casualty that went missing in action was Kill Team Cassius, basically being moved out of their original index and then sent to Legends, and then remaining firmly in Legends when they came out with the digital index. These guys represent the Deathwatch veterans led by Chaplain Cassius of the Ultramarines. Now, at least in my opinion, they have some of the nicest sculpts of the Deathwatch, a whole bunch of individual miniatures that are themed to their respective chapters, say an Imperial Fist heavy weapon bearer, a Raven Guard Vanguard veteran, and a Salamander Terminator with a heavy flamer. Obviously they do have Legends rules, so they are absolutely fine for more casual games, but Legends still puts a whole bunch of people off, and plus it means they're a lot more sidelined from balance updates or trying to make sure they're strong or interesting. At a lower level of support isn't exactly something to be celebrated. With a whole bunch of things that went to Legends in 10th edition, it's come hand in hand with their models being taken off sale, but not so for Kill Team Cassius. They're still on full sale from the Games Workshop web store. So a bit of an unusual case of where Games Workshop sells the miniature and hasn't taken them down, but seems to have put them into Legends for no particularly obvious reason. Finally, for units that sprung to mind for this one were Synessa and Dexcessa, the Slaanesh Demon twins from Age of Sigmar. These ones are quite recent miniatures, releasing not an enormous amount of time apart from Be'lakor. So as Slaanesh Demon miniatures go, they're some of the most recent ones out there. The idea is that in Age of Sigmar there's a great ritual done to siphon Slaanesh's power, and it wound up taking off a chunk of the god's essence, and that bit's turned into these two, acting as the left and right hand of Slaanesh, I guess. I believe their names are supposed to be like Dexter and Sinister, the left and right hands. They do have a different origin story in Age of Sigmar to most demons in Warhammer 40k, but appearance-wise they don't really strike me as being specific to that setting any more than most of the Chaos demons are. Basically looking like fairly funky and different versions that aren't so enormously different from the Keeper of Secrets, with those great big fan wing things billowing out behind them. I'd argue that the different origin story isn't exactly the biggest reason not to release them for both settings if they are basically Slaanesh demons. It wouldn't really take too much effort to create a plot for their creation in Warhammer 40k. Maybe go for a similar sort of vibe, or write something completely different. Could be interesting enough as explorations for the Chaos deities. I feel like there isn't quite so much focus on the named greater demons in 40k compared with Sigmar perhaps. In any case, let me know your thoughts on these down in the comments below. Which, if any, would you like to see get rule support for Warhammer 40k? And can you think of any other examples that are in a similar sort of fashion? Currently on sale Games Workshop miniatures that could absolutely have some mainline rule support, but for some reason don't. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you'd like to support the channel, I'll also mention that Auspex Tactics has a Patreon page as well. You can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help keep the videos coming. Channel patrons get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.